The book of Job is full of argument and full of human emotion. So Job is afflicted with great suffering because of this wager between God and the Satan. And then his three so-called friends come and try to tell him why he's suffering. And he argues with them and says that he's innocent, that he doesn't deserve this suffering. And they try to tell him that he does, that he must have done something wrong, or at least his children must have done something wrong to deserve the suffering that they've endured. And then at the very end of the book, after all this, these people argue back and forth, and there's even a fourth friend that comes, Elihu, who argues with Job as well. After all this human arguing back and forth, finally at the end of the book, starting in chapter 38, God speaks. The Almighty comes and answers Job directly out of the whirlwind. And this speech has caused some consternation amongst readers for a long time and scholars. The famous British novelist Virginia Woolf writes in a letter to a friend, "I read the book of Job last night. I don't think God comes out of it well," she says. And I think a large part of that is these God speeches at the end of the book, chapters 38 through 41. God comes to Job in the whirlwind, and he says this kind of thing. He says, "Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it?" Goes on to say, "Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stopped." And God goes on to speak about the stars and the weather, and then wild animals, and then these amazing beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan, who seem to be kind of primordial chaos monsters, and the Leviathan is the sea serpent. And God continues to ask Job questions like, where were you, and who are you to say this, and were you there when I did this, or who can you do this? And it can easily be read, these speeches can easily be read as God being very bombastic and kind of beating Job down. One commentator says it's as if God showed up in a big T-shirt that said, "Because I'm God, that's why." That's one way to read the God speeches, the divine speeches, and it's a way that many people do. I think that they can be read in other ways as well, and many other scholars have said this as well. They can be read in a way that invites the reader and invites Job to take his eyes off himself and his own suffering and to see the world around him. The divine speeches don't directly address the question of suffering, or particularly why Job suffers, but they do talk about the world and what kind of world God created, and what place humanity has in that world, and the order that God puts in that world, and the life that thrives in that world, the life of wild animals and of primordial creatures, and even of what we would call inanimate forces like the wind and the rain and the snow. God shows all this to Job. He takes him on the grand tour of the cosmos, I think at least in part to get Job to take his eyes off his own suffering, his own situation, and to expand his vision to see the beautiful and wild and ordered world that God has created. The speeches are radically non-human centered. They're radically non-anthropocentric. One verse in point, or two verses in point, in chapters 38-25, God says, "Who has cut a channel for the torrents of rain, and a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on a land where no person lives, on the desert which is empty of any person, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground put forth grass." This is really one of the few places in the divine speeches where human beings are mentioned, and they're mentioned as being absent, that God brings rain even on the wasteland where no human being lives, where no human being will enjoy it or appreciate it. God is profligate, in other words, with rain, with water, that most precious of resources in the Near East, in the arid Near East. God brings rain even where people aren't going to benefit from it. God loves the whole world. God certainly cares for human beings, but they are only one part of a whole beautiful, vast creation that God gives life to, that God cares for, that God gives freedom to. And Job is invited to appreciate and delight in that world just as God does.